Everyone. I'm back. I'm Grant Faulkner. I'm sure some people have come in while I was away. I'm Executive Director of National Novel Writing Month, also known as NaNoWriMo. That is coming up in November. So if you want to write a novel, and I hope you do, this is a good time to start preparing. You can go to NaNoWriMo.org and sign up. It's all free. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a little bit, but super excited for today's event. We're here to get excited for the premiere of Enola Holmes on Netflix, and that premiere is actually today. I watched about a half hour of the movie right before getting on, and it was super fun and adventurous and romping and witty, and I just wanted to be Enola, essentially. So I hope you check it out. And we're also going to talk to some really fascinating authors about their creative process, their books, and the movies that have been made from their books, so that you can learn about that whole trajectory, that whole creative trajectory. And then, yeah, we're gonna I hope, get ready for National Novel Writing Month, so that you can write your story, as I mentioned. And if you don't know what National Novel Writing Month is, or NaNoWriMo, I want to give you a metaphor to take with you. It's one part writing boot camp, but it's also a rollicking party. And so the boot camp part of it is that you're challenged to write 50,000 words in 30 days. And that is 1,667 words a day. So it's a good challenge. You've got to, dedicate probably at least a couple hours a day to writing. And the way you do that is just to banish your inner editor and to write your story your way and to focus on making progress. And then the rollicking party part is that we are all about community. We have ways to connect with the community online in our forums, through writing groups, through your local regions too. We have 1,000 volunteers around the world who organize usually in-person writing gatherings, but this year they'll be virtual. And then we work with 1,200 libraries also to build writing communities in those libraries. So you can meet fellow writers, and people have formed really strong, vibrant writing communities as a result of NaNoWriMo. So hope you do it this year. And before we start, I wanted to give a special thanks to Netflix and Goodreads for sponsoring this event. And a special thanks to all the authors participating: Angie Thomas, Jenny Han, Roshani Chokshi, and Nancy Springer, and Jack Thorne. Just interviewed Jack Thorne this morning. He's the one who wrote the screenplay for Enola, and Nancy Springer wrote the Enola Holmes series. So thank them for sharing their writerly wisdom with us today. And I want to mention two things about Goodreads. First, they are going to do a giveaway of up to 12 books today, and they're giving away the special edition of the first book in the Enola Holmes series that has a special Netflix cover on it. And so the way to enter to receive those books is to ask a question. And if you look down to the bottom of the screen there, the controls there, the question mark, I think you put your questions in the question mark, and we will have people behind the scenes are going to be choosing the questions. So we want to answer all of your questions, or as many as we can. We probably can't answer all, but we will try to answer as many as we can. And then want to mention that Goodreads also, they it's a great place to go and track your books and post reviews and connect with your friends and chat about books. But they also have a Goodreads author program that they wanted me to mention, which equips authors to control like a profile page on Goodreads and promote their books and engage with readers. It's all free, and basically raise awareness of their stories or author stories. And there's about 110,000 readers, more than that, I think, maybe in the millions. But anyway, it's at goodreads.com. /author/program, and I think that URL will be in the chat window. So thanks again. I saw people coming from literally all over the world. I saw Brooklyn, Ontario, Des Moines, Iowa. So we're covering a lot of geography. And so let's kick things off and welcome Jenny Han up on the screen. And I'm just going to read her bio if you're not familiar with her. She also has movies on Netflix too. She is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of To All the Boys I've Loved Before, which I watched a bit of today as well. She is an executive producer on all 3 Netflix films based on the series. And she's also the author of the New York Times bestselling Summer I Turned Pretty series. And she's a former librarian, and she earned her MFA in creative writing at the New School. And now she lives in Brooklyn, New York. And I also want to mention that Jenny wrote a wonderful pep talk for NaNoWriMo, and you can find that on our website. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. This is going to be a treat for me because especially my daughter, I've been bragging to my daughter all week that we're going to talk. So I hope she found a way to maybe, I don't know, sneak out of school today to watch this, but we'll watch it later if not. But hey, I want to kick off, since National Novel Writing Month is coming up, and so many people, a lot of people are writing their first novel or writing their first fiction, really. And so one of the big questions we get is, should you sit down and meticulously plan or outline your novel? And how much should you plan, or how should you plan? And then some people don't like to plan. They just like to jump in. They have, they trust in the creative technique of what they call pantsing, which is right by the seat of your pants. And then we have a phrase that I think is unique to NaNoWriMo, which is called a planter, somewhere in between. So I'm curious where you fall on that spectrum.
I am a pantser all the way. I've never been one to outline books. I find it can feel sort of like constraining. And I like to find moments of serendipity, and it's hard for me to do that if I'm kind of going by a script. And so, although speaking of scripts, now I'm doing some screenwriting, and for that you kind of have to outline a bit more because the time constraints, and there's a lot more rules in screenwriting than there are novels, which a novel can be as long as you want it to be. So I think we'll see, because I haven't actually gone back to writing a novel since I've started screenwriting. So maybe now my brain will have like kind of shifted itself into a plotter.
Huh. I think writing screenplays is a great way to become a plotter. When I've done that, I've had to think of that 3-act structure. Mm-hmm. But I think sometimes I think that pantsers, I think it's really wonderful. We're not prescriptive at NaNoWriMo. It's whatever creative process you find. But sometimes I think the process of pantsing, like writing the rough draft, is a type of planning itself. Like you're exploring the story. I don't know if that's how you feel about it, or do you think about it a lot beforehand?
I write very slowly. And so I'm not one of those people that does like the kind of rough first draft and then they do the writing and the rewriting. I take a long time to do the first draft. And so my like subsequent drafts end up being more like kind of like, I see it as like thickening the soup. And I kind of have the structure set, and I'm figuring out like what I'm missing and what more connective tissue I need.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned thickening the soup, because we're going to get into some baking, how baking relates to writing a little bit later, because I know you're a baker as well. Mm-hmm. I'm curious though, what it's like, to see your novel get adapted into a movie, and how involved you were in that process. I guess you were an executive producer, so you were fairly involved, although creatively involved is different than being a producer. And what was it like walking on set and seeing what you'd written on the page there in reality?
I was really nervous. Yeah, I was really like nervous, and like I got there, and I would say the most sort of moving part for me was seeing all the people who are there, who you don't really think about when you think about, as a layperson, just someone who likes movies. I didn't think about how many people would be there that weren't, the actors. It's like, people who go around and they're like doing the light, or like Key Grip, the sound guys, everybody. And to think that they all chose to be a part of that project, and to know that it started with me writing the story, it was very humbling.
I bet. Yeah, there are hundreds of people there, right? In the end, at least if I count up all the people at the end of the credits.
People there, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, do you have any particular favorite books that have been turned into movies that you'd like to share with us today?
Well, okay, so recently, Normal People.
Oh, yeah.
The show. It made me like, I was crying and I felt very moved by this show. And I thought, the author was actually one of the writers of the show, and she's one of the producers, so she was super involved. And then that makes sense when you see it, because I think it really brought it to life beautifully, and the two actors are phenomenal.
Cool.
And then I also brought The Virgin Suicides by Jennings.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think it's if you haven't seen it, it's a bit of an older movie. And again, actually, it's an adult novel about teenagers, which I tend to be drawn to. But this, like, I think that Sofia Coppola just rendered it so gorgeusly and brought so much emotion to it. It really felt like teenagehood.
I agree. I recommended that to my kids when they were teens, and said it's not, I don't know what a YA novel technically is. I guess it's about people who are teens. But yeah, I love that story, and the movie's gorgeous.
I always say when people ask me what the difference is between like a YA novel and adult novel, for me personally, I think that YA novels are ultimately hopeful. And I don't think you could say the same for an adult story. It's not really necessary, but I think for a YA novel, I don't know that I've read one that ends in a hopeless place. And it's because you're keeping in mind your readership, and I never want to leave adult or teen or whatever, whoever they are. I don't really want to leave my reader feeling hopeless.
I like that as a definition. It's much better than mine. That was just about age. So it gives me more to think about. And yeah,
books written about a young person that's an adult novel, like Room, is not, you wouldn't call that to be, you know, a middle grade novel just because it's about a kid.
Right.
So
yeah, and Virgin Suicides too. Doesn't exactly end in a lot of hope. Per the suicide in the title. Well, you know, I'm interested because sometimes people forget that, like, your books were bestsellers before it was turned into a movie. So you already had a degree of fame, but at the same time, when the movie came out, it really became even bigger and kind of took over the internet. And so, just curious, what did that feel like? I guess both as a person and as an author. Does that change the way you perceive your stories?
It's very overwhelming. I think you know, the book community is a lot smaller than like the movie and TV watching community, and the YA one is smaller still. And so I think I was coming at it from a really like cozy, intimate space with my readers who, you know, bring me baked goods at events, and it's like this much more intimate relationship. And so I think going literally overnight, putting something on Netflix, and you're talking about millions of people all over the world are watching it at the same time. That's like the beauty and the, I guess, grandiosity of having your book adaptation on Netflix, because you all over the world, it happens, it drops at the same time. If your country has Netflix, then you can watch it. And I think it just broadens the audience in a really big way.
Could you sleep that night of its premiere? I'm thinking of Nancy Springer and Enola today.
Yes, because we had the premiere party the same night. And so it was like, we were at the party, we're dancing, we're celebrating. And then like midnight on Eastern time, right? Yeah, then it dropped. And so I couldn't just sit there and look at my phone. It was still like in the celebratory mood.
Yeah, good. Sounds fun. Well, I want to mention to people, please ask questions. I think, I can't tell, I'm not in the background here to see, but please ask questions, because I want to ask Jenny your questions too, and those will be put up on screen in just a moment. But before we go to questions, I love Lara Jean's style, and I know that you wrote with, like, style influenced your characterization of her, and that you created, I believe, something vision board or mood boards, mood boards, and then you have some to share with us. So I was wondering if you could talk about the mood boards and kind of point some things out and how they influenced Lara Jean.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, it was really important to me to communicate to the filmmakers that Lara Jean's aesthetic is very much a part of her personality, and she's an introverted, more shy character who expresses herself through her clothing. And so I described it to them as kind of like 60s meets 90s meets like Asian streetwear was like the vibe that I wanted. So I was showing them mood boards like these. I made a bunch for them to give them ideas of that. Because I think sometimes when you write something that's contemporary realistic fiction, I think people can be mistaken in thinking that doesn't have its own look in a way, because it's not like Hunger Games where everyone's wearing like, you know, grays and like these like burlap materials, or Harry Potter where they're in robes, because it's contemporary. And so that was really important to me to get that vibe right.
Cool. And did you just like grab photos, fashion photos on the internet then and put them?
Yeah, I spent a long time looking and sending them links to stuff that they could buy, and, you know, and thought a lot about the character and like where she would buy from and where she would draw inspiration from.
Yeah, I think we've got even more than one screen here. Are there any particular photos that you'd like to point out about really informing Lara Jean?
The mood board I made for her bedroom, which I really wanted to look saturated in color and to have so many mementos and little trinkets and treasures, because, you know, when you're a teenage girl, you don't have control that much space in your life, but your bedroom is where you can really express yourself and show the world like who you are. And it's like a really like special like private space that I wanted to make it feel really real. And so these are some inspiration shots I gave. And in the movie you can't even see how in depth they went with it, but there's a lot of like little special drawings and like poems and pictures and stuff and ticket stubs that are on the walls.
Yeah, this looks very like Lara Jean's room to me. And so you did this more for the movie, not for your to inform your book's characterization, or both?
Both. For all three of the book covers, I wanted them to be like spaces that felt like home and not like sets. And so particularly for the third one, Always and Forever Lara Jean, it's in her bedroom, and I used some of my stuff from my own like 16-year-old bedroom in it. So if you look closely, there's little Easter eggs all over that cover, like my hairbrush and like a photo of Leonardo DiCaprio from Romeo and Juliet, and there's even like a picture of me on the wall.
Oh, cool! That's great. Great movie trivia for viewers to look for.
Trivia. Check out that book, and then you'll see.
Yeah, Bryce, can you flip through a couple other?
There it goes. So you can see that's me on the cover, helping her. We're trying on dresses for that shoot. So you can see it like kind of by the spine, and that's my floral jacket. And like a lot of little things on there are from my own bedroom.
Oh, that's so fun. Is there one more screen? Mm-hmm. Here's the final screen.
Yeah, there you go.
Is that your hairbrush?
That's my hairbrush. That's Leo. As you can see in the gold frame, 2 frames, and that of him from Romeo and Juliet. I actually cut that out of the newspaper when the movie came out, which was in '95, and then I like got that frame and spray painted it gold. And so I thought it'd be really fun to put it in her bedroom. And then actually the biggest Easter egg of all is, so there's a copy of Little Women underneath it, and then there's a copy of The Summer I Turned Pretty underneath that. It's like kind of connected universes.
Yeah, I love these layers of characterization through set design for both writing and movies. I think this is great. Like people are always grappling with how to, develop characters for their novels, and so often people turn to these character background sheets, which I've personally had a tough time with, because they basically were, it's like, what's your character's favorite ice cream? All these tiny little details that don't really help me bring a character to life necessarily. It's a lot of little details, which are good, but it doesn't help me like visualize things like this. This is like you're living with her in a way, shopping with her.
It's fun to tell story through images as well. I think that's been probably the most rewarding, exciting, fun part of producing on the movies, is being able to storyteller like in a different capacity.
Yeah. Well, cool. Thanks for sharing that with us, and I hope people take inspiration out there, the viewers, and think about this as a writing process for themselves, and just give it a try. It's kind of like the character background sheet in a way. You can do both, in fact. Mm-hmm. We're going to go from the bedroom to the kitchen here, and because I know that you like to bake, and Lara Jean likes to bake, and in your NaNoWriMo pep talk, you wrote, "Each book is different. Each process is different. Writing a book is not like baking a cake, though how I wish it were. When you write a book, you don't just insert ingredients and out comes a beautiful cake. I mean, book." So can you talk to us a little bit about how, I guess, baking is not like a cake, or not like writing a book? But I'm also curious if baking plays a role in your creative process at all, if there are things that are...
It does. When I'm really stressed out, I bake. And here's how it's not like a book. And here's why it's helpful for me to bake, is that you measure the ingredients out, you put them into the bowl, and then put them in the oven, and out it comes in a finite period of time. Now, when you write a novel, unlike NaNoWriMo, like, you could end up spending years on something, trying to get it right. And it feels sometimes like really like an infinite process, which can feel frustrating. And so I think the way that I combat that is by baking, because I know I can start and finish something in a set period of time, and what comes out is going to look like the picture or what I was hoping for, usually, not always. And that I think just feels satisfying for me. And another sort of meta thing was, as I was writing the third To All the Boys novel, I had a storyline about Lara Jean trying to perfect a chocolate chip cookie. And it was because I was doing it in real life. And I'm like, everything I do is grist for the mill anyway. So I just like put it into the book. And then when I finally figured out what the problem was, then I also put it into the story.
I love that. I love that having something creative in your life that you get immediate gratification or satisfaction from, while you're also working on this big other thing that, like you said, it can be years sometimes before you at least get it done. So there's a lot of, I guess, endurance or persistence involved in that. Not quite like cooking, or it's a long time in the oven, put it that way. You slow cook it for years. Well, cool. Well, Bryce, I'm going to ask if we've got some questions, which I hope we do. I think they just kind of pop up here for us. But he's selecting some. Here we go. Daisy Y. What keeps you focused during the writing process, and how do you overcome writer's block? Or do you believe in writer's block?
I don't really believe in writer's block per se. I just believe that writing is really hard. And to me, everything feels like writer's block. And so when I get hit with like a wave of inspiration, then I try to run with it and write as much as I can. But there's many days where I feel completely uninspired. And honestly, what keeps me going is I have a deadline. If there's sort of external pressures on me that I have to finish something, is how I finish something. Otherwise, I think I could be playing around with the story forever.
We believe in deadlines at National Novel Writing Month. We say a goal and a deadline is a creative midwife. So yeah, they work really well as a creative technique. Keep them coming, Bryce, if you got more. Otherwise, I've got some other questions as well. Test out this technology. This is our first time on Shindig, everybody. So we see representation matters. How challenging was it to convince the powers that be for Lara Jean to be played by an Asian actress?
So that was definitely a journey for me. I had a lot of interest right away before the book was even out on shelves in making it into a film. I had, talked to producers and, but nobody was not only were they not willing to have an Asian American lead, they didn't understand why that was important to the story, because the story is not about her being Asian. And so for me, that was really just a deal breaker. So it was like those conversations would stop. So it wasn't about convincing them. It was like, if we're not on the same page with that, then you don't understand like what the story is. And so then it really wasn't until I was working with, first it was Overbrook, which is Will Smith's company, and then Awesomeness, who came on board afterwards, that people were willing to make that movie with an Asian lead. So nobody else wanted to. So it wasn't like I was having to be in those conversations with people after a decision was made. It was like I wasn't going to proceed if we weren't on the same page.
That's great. So you just had a no deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Many times throughout the process, where it was like, oh, we're close, but there's this one thing. Is that really important for you? And I'm like, yeah, that's really important. So no, I don't want to be making a movie with them.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that. Bryce, any more? Here comes one from Taylor B. Mood boards are such a great idea to paint a picture for the characters in your novel. I'm a visual person, so I would so badly want to draw my characters, but I am not the best artist. I will invest in making mood boards for my characters. Did you start DIE? What does DIE stand for? Or maybe that broke off.
Maybe there's a word count limit.
Maybe. Yeah.
I guess I'll just guess that what it was going to be. Maybe did you start doing it before you started writing the book? And I usually do it afterwards, once we're figuring out cover concepts, and then I start to visualize like how I want it to feel. And it's not always like a direct, like one-to-one image. It's more like, what do you feel when you look at that image? And does it convey the story and the feeling I want you to have from reading the story?
Mm-hmm. I talk to a lot of writers who are hesitant to put themselves into a character. they kind of want to hide themselves, or makes them feel vulnerable. But it sounds like you like that in a way. Like you look for opportunities in your life that you can put into a character. Is that right?
I would say that if somebody's saying that they don't put themselves in their characters, I feel like that's probably not true, because I think you can't help but put yourself in the characters. I mean, and it doesn't mean that you're going to make a character that likes to bake because you like to bake. But I think, when you sort of like uncover a story and dig into it, you're putting in, observations that you have or thoughts that you've had into your characters. It doesn't mean that you believe them or not, but I really would be very shocked if there was ever like an author that didn't put any piece of themselves in the book. 'Cause that seems, I don't know, it seems impossible to me.
It does, yeah. I've also heard people say that they're reluctant to put people they know in their books.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I think that people oftentimes in your life, if you're a writer, think that characters are based on them, and usually it's like, no.
Yeah, or one part, just one little part.
Yeah, I mean, or maybe not at all, but I think people project or take,
True.
Pieces away from a story and assume it's about them, maybe because they have the same color hair or even the same name. But I think more than anything else, people probably put the pieces of themselves into those characters that are the most like annoying or evil.
I find that sometimes people read with that as their primary purpose, to find out if they're represented, so they can easily make up that story. Bryce, any more questions? Okay, now that your books have been made into, this comes from Devin KC, have been made into movies and your audience has increased, are you aware of your audience more or in different ways as you write future books? Do you see your audience differently now that you're more known?
I don't know the answer to this question. I think it's a good question, but I think that as much as possible, I guess if I was going to give any piece of advice to an author, it would be to try and write with that door closed, because I think you want to write the story that you want to write and feel free to do so. And I think writing is a brave act. And I think if you're writing towards an audience, sometimes that can sort of direct you more than your actual like creativity or what's compelling you to write that story in the first place.
Why do you think writing is a brave act?
I think you're putting your ideas, on the page and inviting other people to judge them. And I think most people's jobs don't have an audience of, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people judging what you did at work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you're revealing something of yourself, even if it's not you specifically. It's something that you've chosen to share with the world, and I think that is brave.
Yeah, you get reviews, you get all sorts of comments on the internet, all sorts of tweets. So
yeah, I think the game has really changed with social media, because it used to be that someone could read your book and then maybe write you a letter to tell you what they thought about it. But now we have Goodreads, we've got Twitter, we've got Instagram, we've got so many different ways for people to reach you as the author and tell you what they think. And in some ways it's wonderful. In some ways I think that can be really hard for a writer who is sensitive or I don't know, has a hard time with like criticism. And I think you have to find your own ways to sort of like quiet that noise and write. And then after it's out, and people are free to have whatever opinion they're going to have of it. But during the writing process, if you can keep that noise as kind of as low as you can, I think that would be probably most helpful.
Okay. Bryce, any more questions? I love these audience questions. Here comes one from Angela Knight. Maybe you can just read these too. Maybe you don't need me to read them, but I will since I'm facilitator. What are some of your favorite things to do for finding plot lines or finding the flow of a story? This comes from Angela Knight. Plot.
I don't think I have anything really like prescriptive in terms of like what to do when you're finding the flow. I'll say I like to listen to music. I like to call up a writer friend and talk through a scene if I'm having trouble walking into it. Those are, I guess, my top go-to things.
Yeah, so plot kind of happens, maybe. Is that true?
I mean, since I'm a pantser, you know, I just kind of follow the road where it's leading me.
Yeah. Well, we've got the founder of NaNoWriMo has a book called No Plot, No Problem, with the premise that you will find the plot if you write the novel. And I think it's always interesting because I talk to pantsers and sometimes they're very, I guess, I don't know, sometimes more nervous about finding the plot than planners. Like I think a lot of pantsers feel like they should be planning. But my point of view is always like, just trust your process, like.
I mean, yeah, for me, my process is being blindfolded in the woods and you're just like doing like this for 90% of it. And then it suddenly clicks for me when I'm almost finished with it. Oh, this is what this story is. So then I have to go back and figure out what's missing. But that can be a really, really frustrating process. And I wish that was not my process. But as of yet, that's what it is.
Yeah. I like that metaphor, though, because like being blindfolded in the woods, you're also using your other four senses or more than some people think. Yeah. So that's great. Bryce, any more questions? What is your favorite thing to bake?
Lately, I've been loving making buckwheat chocolate chip cookies. Are really delicious. But favorite things of all time, I would say I like to do cinnamon rolls because it's very satisfying and it makes a nice little like gift to somebody. And you're like, oh, cinnamon rolls, like homemade. It's kind of special.
There's nothing like homemade cinnamon rolls. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious, Jenny, just as we kind of conclude things here, but what are you working on now? You mentioned screenplays. Are you working on any novels?
Yeah, I am working. I've had a couple of novels that I've been sort of chasing for like the past few years. And so now I feel like my schedule is sort of opening up a bit to where I can kind of sink into them. I usually have two things going on at the same time just because that's just good for me, where I start feeling really hemmed in by one, then I go to the other one, then I go back, and then it feels like, oh, yay, I'm like revisiting old friend. And then I'm also working on a screenplay, which is for a show on Netflix that is Shonda Rhimes' like anthology show about love and marriage. And I'm doing an episode of that.
Cool. Well, I can't wait to see it. We have a lot of writers getting ready to write their novels in November. Any parting words of encouragement or any advice you want to give them? I
think, write like the wind, and don't look back, just keep going. And, I think every day, this is an actual tip, is I like to write by hand first. I think sometimes the computer screen can feel just really intimidating, and it's like a lot of like white space you're looking at and you're like, what am I going to write? But when you write by hand, for me, I feel like I look at the notebook and I feel really excited to like fill the page because you can kind of write all over it. And maybe that's something that people could try. I love that. I think writing by hand is really great because it kind of slows you down. It's just like a different sort of process with your thoughts and your. And you don't have to delete anything. You can cross it out or you can move it around, but it's still there and you can come back to it later too. Yeah, I love typing it in as well because then you did double the work, but you did it. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jenny. I wish we could all share your cinnamon rolls with all the thousands of people here, but we'll do it virtually. Thanks so much for hanging out. Absolutely. Well, thank you for your advice and good luck with everything. And thank you. Yeah. Bye. Thank you so much again, Jenny. And the next thing we got on our agenda is we are here to celebrate the premiere of Enola Holmes, which is a fantastic film and has a really cool trailer we want to share with you that I think is queuing up in just a second. There are a variety of trailers. In fact, if you go to this button down here in the left corner, you can watch watch the whole film on Netflix or go to that page and see the trailers. I forgot to show these buttons, but you can also click over to Goodreads. You can go to NaNoWriMo to sign up to write your novel there too. It's free. So Bryce, if you want to cue up this fantastic, romping, adventurous, vigorous trailer, that would be wonderful.
A week ago, I awoke. Mother? To find that my mother was missing.
Enola.
Sherlock, I have kept every clipping of every case of yours I could ever find. And yet, it took our mother's disappearance to bring you home.
Mother always found you quite extraordinary, as do I.
You have to make some noise if you want to be heard.
I hear you, Mother. I'm going to find you. Enola Holmes, rated PG-13.
All right. Did that clip off? Not sure if I'm back. Hello. I'm wearing, this is a Victorian, this is my only Victorian item in my wardrobe. It's a coffin hat. And people were buried in coffin hats because it costs a lot more money to get a longer casket. So this is a Victorian coffin hat worn for this occasion. And I love that line. You've got to tell your story. Your story has to be heard. This is what we do at NaNoWriMo. So I hope people are getting ready to write their stories. And we have another clip that we're going to go to now. Nancy Springer, the author of the Enola Holmes series. She's wonderful, wonderfully smart author. And she couldn't make it today. So we did a brief interview with her beforehand. And she has written 50 books. She's really prolific. She's been writing for 40 years and wrote 50 books. And she's going to talk about one thing that I thought was really cool, plays into like the mood boards that Jenny made, is that Nancy Springer created her story world through these Victorian coloring books that she did. And she has more things to share as well. So Bryce, if you could cue up Nancy, that'd be wonderful. Hey everybody, welcome back. That was a super exciting trailer. I can't wait to watch the film tonight. And I also want to give a big thanks to our next guest, Nancy Springer, who is the author of Enola Holmes. Nancy's written a 6-book series about Sherlock Holmes's younger sister, which has garnered a lot of attention and led to this special Netflix film. And Nancy, do you have a copy you can hold up for us?
Absolutely. How's that?
That is a lovely cover. Yeah.
It's the special Netflix cover. They've got a little logo there, and they put Enola's name in big letters.
Oh, so cool. Well, it looks great. I hope everyone reads it and watches the film.
We don't have the movie poster cover, but in some other countries we do.
Is that right?
Yes.
Well, we all just watched the trailer, and it is, let me think, just vigorous with adventure, I think. There's an adventure in like every film frame. So I'm curious, as an author who was just immersed in writing this series and researching it, how did it feel to watch your words and your story come to life on the screen? I bet that must have been really interesting.
I haven't actually seen the whole film yet.
Oh.
I'm not going to see it until you do. Until everybody does.
Okay. Well, what do you think of the trailer then? Was that interesting?
I love it. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's a great trailer. And it has that semi-humorous mood that I adore. That this is not going to be a deep, dark, gloomy sort of event here. This is going to be fun.
Cool. I can tell. Every film frame is just like pulsing with action, and I love the humor. I love the way that the trailer ends with "You don't know embroidery." That was great. Well, hey, I've read that early on in life you lived in a sort of Eden that was, somewhat similar to Enola's environment, I think. You lived near a brook and a river, and you played amid wildflowers and willows and discovered herons and hawks. And you wrote, "Until I was 13, I ran like a freckled fawn where the owls lived, where the wild flocks grew, where sometimes frogs could be caught." This sounds lovely and adventurous, and I'm so curious if your early life of running free in the forest informed Enola at all. She's obviously disposed for an adventurous life outdoors, and she's even called a wild child.
Absolutely, yes, totally. In many, many ways, Enola is me. I didn't realize that until after the first book manuscript was turned in, but I wondered, I had such terrible butterflies turning that manuscript in. And I thought, why? And then I realized that I had invested myself even more than usual in the book. Yes,
interesting.
Enola are us.
Well, that's really interesting, Nancy. And to loop back to another adventure, the adventure of writing and reading, I'm curious, who were you as a writer and a reader when you were young and living in this Eden?
I would read everything. I don't know where my parents got all the books because honestly, this was back in the 1950s. There were no bookstores. There was no Walden Books or Borders or anything like that. Yet somehow my mother and my father had shelves and shelves full of all kinds of books. And I just was, anything I wanted to read, I just grabbed. If it was too old for me, I found out soon enough.
Wow. So you were living in just an idyllic space in some ways. You're making it sound like you had this.
In some ways, yes. Of course, I was the kid who got picked on at school. That part wasn't good, but the home life was pretty darn good. Yes.
Yeah, it sounds very nice to have all the outdoors activities and the reading. And there's a line in the trailer where Enola's mother says there are two paths she can take: the path she chooses or the path others choose for her. And the path of being a writer is rarely one that others choose for us. So can you tell us more about how you chose the path of being a writer?
It more or less just happened. When I was raised in the 50s and later my teenage years in the early 60s, girls were either going to be a teacher, a librarian, a beautician, a nurse, or I think I'm missing something or other. But there were few choices. And I wasn't really expected to choose. My parents more or less assumed that I would be a school teacher and that they would send me to teachers college and that I would become a school teacher. I had other ideas, but I didn't know what to do about them. What I actually ended up doing was marrying while still in college. And then after college, I was so filled with daydreams that I thought as if I have to offload them. And I started to write, but not with any serious intentions of being a writer. It was just something I did. Like some people crochet, I write.
Interesting. So how did you go from that place of being a kind of crochet type writer, hobbyist writer maybe, to becoming the author of, I think you've written 50 books, something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. Well, once the first book was actually written, I had to admit to myself that I wanted to do something with it. So of course, this was back when typing was the thing, big, honking, heavy-duty typewriters. And it took months simply to type up the final draft. And then I had to admit that I was going to send it in somewhere. And very unscientifically, I went out into my living room, looked on the copyright page of my books, found some addresses, and sent in a query letter.
Interesting. Go ahead.
1 out of a dozen editors actually replied, send it in. And they promptly rejected it, but they sent me a 3-page letter of what I had done wrong and what I needed to do. And from there on, I was rolling.
Great. That's an amazing story. And I remember those days of the typewriters. I actually took a typewriting class in junior high. And I always say it was the most important class I've ever taken in my life, although I did get a B-. But as a writer, I'm very, very happy I learned. But I'm very happy not to have those big typewriters because a computer just works a lot better.
I had to take my typewriting in summer school. It wasn't in the curriculum for academic students, only for secretarial.
Oh, okay. Well, hey, one of my favorite parts of the Enola series is the mystery that is Enola's relationship with her mother, Lady Eudora Holmes. Great names here. And she's a fascinating character on a number of levels. And I'm just curious where she came from. Was she based on a historical figure or somebody you know?
She, in part, is my own mother, who was a fascinating character on many levels. My mother was an artist. She made a living by painting pet portraits for people, but her favorite thing to do was to paint watercolor flowers. And the mother in the movie is very different than the mother in the books. I love both of them, but the mother in the books is based very much on my own mother. She exercised benign neglect. She made sure I was clothed and fed, and more or less out of trouble. If it wasn't bleeding, it was okay. And I did my own thing.
As a parent, I think benign neglect is often underrated as a parenting technique. I'm curious. Also, it's great that you based that character on your mother. I think sometimes writers don't feel that they have permission to use real life people to inspire their characters. So I just want to tell anyone who's writing or who's going to write during NaNoWriMo this year to feel free to look to those people in your lives for inspiration for your characters. But on that note, you were also working not in just real life, you were working in this fictional universe that was created by Arthur Conan Doyle's canon. And, in some ways I was thinking about it that the Enola Holmes series is a type of fan fiction. Were you at all intimidated by working in this very, very well-known series of books?
Well, by that time I had so many books under my belt that, no, I don't believe I was intimidated. If anything, I was using the Conan Doyle books as sort of a foil. They left so much room for a really feminist character that I really couldn't believe that someone else hadn't gotten there before me. Why hadn't somebody else done this before? Because Sherlock Holmes, all the stories about Sherlock Holmes simply beg for a kid sister to I'm searching for the right word, and I'm sorry, I know.
Challenge him.
Yeah, to pull his beard.
Yeah. She's a good beard puller. You did it well. I enjoy watching her in action, and so many of those lines are just perfect. They'll stay with me. Well, you know what? This is kind of a getting ready to write a novel question, and especially as we head towards National Novel Writing Month next year, or next month, and not next year. It's coming up. Sign up now. You're a prolific writer. Obviously, you've written more than 50 books, and that's more than a book a year for you. I think you've been a writer for like 4 decades or so. And so I'm curious, because in NaNoWriMo, we have this ongoing conversation about how much or whether you should plan your novel or whether you should write it by the seat of your pants or somewhere in between. And I'm just curious, are you a planner, a pantser, or a plantser, as we call it?
Very much, I was more or less forced to write by my daydreams. Such compelling daydreams that they made me worry about myself if I was mentally ill in some way. And I thought that by offloading them, I could perhaps lessen the power that they had over me. But no, more simply crawled in to take their place. So at first, writing was more or less just something that I had to do, the way some people simply have to cook nice meals, or some people just have to look good, or whatever or some people have to be active in a sport, whatever your thing might be. Later on, it became simply the way I made a living, and that in itself was quite motivational. So by the time I could have taken a job outside the home, by the time my children were in school, I was making enough as a writer so that I knew that was what I was meant to be. And I started putting it first instead of saying it was a hobby.
I think that's very important, especially for NaNoWriMo writers as well, just to make it a priority, to make creativity a priority for the month of November at the very least, and to write your story. And I'm curious, because we do have a lot of people preparing to write their novels, and I love all the cryptograms and codes and puzzles throughout your series. And so, but they all beg the question of how much research was involved, and you also had to use Victorian vocabulary and create this Victorian world and make it accessible to the modern reader. So did you do a lot of research ahead of time?
Tremendous amount of research. Now, luckily, I was an English literature. I was an English lit major. I had read any number of Victorian novels all my life. My parents, in effect, were Victorians. My father was born in 1906, my mother in 1909. They were pretty close to being real, genuine Victorians in the way they thought and the way they spoke. A lot of the way Enola speaks is based on the way my parents spoke when I was a child. Oh, my stars and garters. I didn't think of that. That was already there. Uh-huh. My word. And yes, I researched very much, reading, people's biographies, autobiographies, reading books about the Victorian era, but also getting a lot of craft projects from a place called Dover Publications, and getting the paper dolls and the stickers and the coloring books. And it was ridiculous how helpful the coloring books were, because as I colored, I internalized everything. Coal scuttles, the back of the piano, everything that the way the palm fronds were stuck in the tops of the pictures. It all just sunk in to an extent that when I started to write, I didn't have to think I was already there.
That is so interesting. You know, I've talked to authors and writers of all different levels for years and asked all sorts of questions, and I've never heard anyone say that a coloring book helped inspire their story world. So I think that that's great.
Books were adults, and they were annotated with a great deal. Well, you want me to go grab one?
Sure. Everyone, Nancy will be right back with this amazing coloring book that informs her story world. You know, we get questions like this in NaNoWriMo all the time, is how do I build this fantasy world, this fictional world that I'm going to write a novel in? And so this is like one great technique. We're seeing it in action. Nancy's going to show her coloring. You want to hold it up close to the camera?
Can you see? That's
Enola
Holmes's room.
Oh.
That's her bedroom.
That is so great. Did you give that to Netflix?
No. No, I didn't. But yeah, I have many like this. Victorian costume, Victorian, I forget. But I simply had dozens of them. Well, not maybe dozens, but a lot.
Yeah. Well, next time I'm going to choose the novel I write about based on the coloring books available to me. It sounds like a fun way to do it.
They have it on everything, Celtic, whatever, Greek, anything.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious about talking about novel structure here. You know, the Enola Holmes series, they're basically three plot lines. There's Enola and her mom, Enola and Sherlock, and Enola finding a missing person. And so did that kind of three-act formula make writing the books easier or more challenging?
Way, way more challenging. I am not by nature a plotter. I actually never thought I would write mystery. I've always been a character-directed writer, and Enola is a strong character, and she took me by the nose, and she just took me wherever she wanted to go. But as for braiding those three plots together, that was hard. That was a workout, writing all those books.
I bet, and I'm coming from this as a non-plotter as well, so that's why I wanted to ask. I was very curious about that. It's a great formula, though. Well, you know what? As we head into National Novel Writing Month, I'm asking each of the authors we talked to today. I'm hoping that you might have a writing exercise or even just a writing prompt to impart to the young writers watching, young or old writers watching, that they can take with them to explore, much like Enola is exploring the world in order to get ready to find their novel. The novel is a missing person, maybe. Anyway, what would you tell them?
What I've always done when I'm running dry is I've started a word ocean. And that means you take a fishbowl or something similar, and you take various scraps of paper to suit your fancy, and you choose your favorite words. And your favorite words are going to be those words that resonate with you. Not every word is going to be your favorite word. You just choose them, you write them down. That one says blossom, and I found a piece of flowery paper for it. Somewhere in here, there's one that says salamander. This one says mango. Couple more. Acacia. Tangerine.
Those are great words.
Yeah. So,
and what do you do with them then? What happens?
You write them down. You fill your ocean. This is one day's work.
Okay.
You do it for as long as you care to, and the ideas will fly out of it like flying fish.
I see.
It's
So it's
odd. It's something unconscious.
uh-huh.
I don't know where the ideas come from, but by choosing your favorite words and playing with them. Everything I do is based on play. It really works to play. The coloring books, the word ocean.
That's a great note to end on, Nancy, because I think that's what we try to do at NaNoWriMo is take a lot of the anguish out of writing and take a more whimsical and playful approach. And so I totally agree. There needs to be more playfulness involved in writing novels. And I really appreciate the playfulness that you've told us about and everything you've told us about Enola Holmes. So I can't wait to watch it tonight. It was so fun watching the trailer. So I know it will be fun. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you, NaNoWriMo.
Hey, China.
Hi, can everybody see me?
Yep, you sound great.
Okay,
Why don't you
great.
go ahead and introduce yourself.
So my name is China Powell, and I am the editorial intern at National Novel Writing Month, also known as NaNoWriMo. When Grant asked if anyone was interested in being a part of this and interviewing Angie Thomas, I immediately raised my hand. It was extremely exciting to me because I remember the first time I read The Hate You Give. And honestly, it was a very hard read. It took me a few tries to get through it all the way, but a lot of books that are important really are. And so I was very excited to be a part of this. I do want to just thank Grant for this opportunity one more time and to introduce Angie Thomas to all of you. So for those of you who may not know, Angie Thomas went from being a homeschooled kid in Jackson, Mississippi to writing soap opera fan fiction to being a teen rapper with 2 different names to getting her bachelor's in creative writing from, I believe it was Belhaven University. And
Belhaven, yes.
Yeah. And now she is the author of the acclaimed novels, The Hate You Give and On the Come Up. So I just want to introduce you, Angie. Is there anything you want to say about yourself that I forgot to mention?
No, you got it all. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, so I just want to start off with just a simple question. What made you decide to put pen to paper and write both The Hate You Give and On the Come Up? What was the inspiration for those novels?
I've always been writing for as long as I can remember. Well, I've been always telling stories for as long as I can remember. Like if you ask my mom right now, she would tell you that when I was really little, if she read me bedtime stories and I didn't like the way that they turned out, I would tell my own version. So like Dr. Seuss, I hated the way that Green Eggs and Ham ended because I was like, Mommy, he shouldn't like green eggs and ham at the end just because everybody else does. And so she was like, okay, tell your own version. So I got my little crayon. I don't recommend doing this, but I got my little crayon and I wrote in the book at the last page, I still don't like green eggs and ham. I still don't like them, Sam I am. So technically, I guess I was a little control freak. But for me, telling stories was always a way that I processed the world, a way that I understood the world, a way that I connected with the world. Both The Hate You Give and On the Come Up were written from very personal spaces. With The Hate You Give, I was a lot like Star at the time, living in a mostly Black, poor neighborhood, going to a mostly white, upper class private school and being 2 different people at 2 different times and listening to conversations where my white classmates didn't understand things that were happening or didn't have any sympathy when a young Black man lost his life at the hands of police brutality. And so The Hate You Give was kind of my response to that. It was a school project that I wrote initially and then later turned into a novel. On the Come Up was kind of a response to some of the pushback that The Hate You Give received. The Hate You Give was banned in several school districts. And for me, when you ban a book, I don't get mad on my behalf. I get mad on the behalf of the kids who connect with those characters and see themselves in those stories, because what you're essentially telling them is your life makes me uncomfortable, so nobody should know about it. And that's where I have a problem. So On the Come Up was my way of speaking to those young people and telling them you have a voice, use it, speak up, speak out. even when it makes people uncomfortable. Speak your truth and stand by it and define yourself. So both of those novels came from truly personal spaces. And I think every single thing that I write will to some degree.
Wow, that's amazing. And honestly, I love that because I also went to a predominantly white high school, and I remember there were very few books by Black authors. There was nothing. We didn't have like a celebratory Black History Month or anything, so we didn't really learn about Black authors other than, you know, of course, Toni Morrison and a couple of things by James Baldwin, but that was it. So being an advocate for young adults and teens who, you know, may not see themselves in the books they read, that's a wonderful thing. And it's kind of funny that you brought up that your book was banned, because I did want to kind of just touch on that a little bit. For those children and teens who want to read your novel but don't have access because it's banned in their schools and libraries might not have it, like, is there anything you would say to those children and teens?
Mm-hmm. I would tell them that they have the power to fight against those bans. If it's something that they feel speaks to them, if it's something that they feel matters to them, they have the power to challenge that. When it first happened in Texas in a school district, a 15-year-old young lady there, she got a petition going and she went before the school board and she did a whole presentation, and it made them put the book back on the shelves. So one, I'd say, you know, if it's something you feel worth fighting for, fight for it. Two, I would say there are thankfully other ways to get the book in your hands. You have online libraries and stuff like that. Support even independent bookshops and stuff, and even borrowed and used bookstores where you can buy books that have been used if you can't afford it. So there are different ways to get it in your hands. But I definitely, I would say too, if there are educators in your life that you feel as if they would help you get this challenge to get it back on shelves, definitely reach out to them, because I know there are so many teachers out there who fight against censorship, specifically in the classroom when it comes to literature, and they're doing an amazing job in that. So you're not alone in trying to fight for it.
Yeah, thank you. And you heard that, folks. And Banned Book Week is next week, I believe. So
yes,
since it's next week, you might want to pick those books up.
Yeah.
And recently, it was announced that Paramount would be bringing On the Come Up to the big screen. And I'm sure that's exciting for you.
Yeah, it's super exciting. You know, not all authors get the opportunity to have their one book turned into a movie. And now here I am with 2 books being turned into movies. The Hate U Give and the experience with that and it becoming a film it was a roller coaster ride. You know, I think about that whole journey often. It felt like a once in a lifetime thing, you know, being on set and seeing this world that I had imagined come to life in front of me. There's no feeling like that. You know, I tell writers all the time, don't write because you want it to be turned into a movie. But if it does get turned into a movie, it's a nice perk, you know, when you're imagining this world by yourself for months, maybe years on end. And then all of a sudden there are these hundreds and thousands sometimes of people who come together to bring it to life. There's no better feeling. So like, to have it happen again is phenomenal. I'm really excited about what's coming forth with it and the energy behind it. Paramount is doing a great job with the team and everything already. And I'm a producer this time, so I'm in on all the phone calls. Like we just had a call the other day about the budget for it, you know, and that for me, that's a whole new experience. So like when Hollywood and they're like, yeah, we can do such and such millions of dollars towards this. And I'm like, huh? That's what we're doing. We're writing big checks now. All right, cool. I think I can get used to this. So it's a bit different. I'm like, so next time I need to add more explosions so y'all can do a bigger budget. There we go. So
are there any actors that you already kind of want to work with on this project?
There are, but I can't ever say it because now I'm like before I could say it with the Hate U Give, like who I wanted, and it wouldn't have any, you know, maybe weight or anything to it. But like now, because I'm a producer with On the Come Up, if I say something, it's like, it's not me just saying it as the author, but it's me saying it as somebody who actually works on the film, you know, because the fact is, a lot of times authors don't work on the movies. I'm sorry to burst the bubble, but authors don't usually have control over films. And I think that's a big misconception. They think we cast movies. They think we are over every single thing. And a lot of times is authors are lucky if they're allowed on set. I was very blessed in the sense that I was not only allowed on set, but I spent 6 weeks on set and the director consulted me a lot. So this time around, though, I am a little more of a decision maker, which doesn't happen often. So I get some input, but my input is not the final say. So that's just a long way to say I can't say who I want in the movie because it could have consequences.
I understand that. And since you are a producer and you have more say, is there anything you would like to change, like from the novel to seeing it on screen? Any plot points that you decided maybe would look different on screen?
Yeah, actually. The funny thing is, like, if I could go back with The Hate You Give, there were things that happened in the movie that I wish I did in the book. And it's kind of like starting like that with On the Come Up. There are things they're doing in the film, in the script, that I wish I did in the book. But there are some things I'm excited to see because it's different from the book. And that is like the musical element. You know, the book is about a 16-year-old girl who's a rapper. And she, you know, has a couple of songs here and there in the book. I wrote out her battle raps and all these different things, but it's not musical like an actual musical. So one element that I'm really excited about is the use of more songs throughout, the use of more hip hop throughout, original songs being written for Bree in the film. And then there's some other things, I can't spoil it, that I wish I would have done in the book as well. But I'm very glad that the musical element is being pulled out more for the film.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I feel like your books have had a very large influence. But if you had the choice, how would you like your books to influence culture, particularly American culture?
How would I like them to influence culture?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh. I hope that a generation of young people are inspired by the stories that I tell enough that they inspired them to speak up, speak out, to get involved, to be active. You know, we use the word activism a lot. And I don't think people just realize the main part of being an activist is to be active, whatever that may look like. I hope that it inspires them to do that. I hope that my books inspire them to define themselves in a world that's going to try to do it for them. We're seeing young people do that. We're seeing them speak up and speak out. You know, this generation, people try to shame them all the time, but this generation they're finding ways to make change happen, you know, and if my books can play any kind of role in that, that's an honor. You know, I've always said, hopefully one day later on down the line, when I'm sitting in the nursing home, there's a generation in charge that can say that they were inspired by Angie Thomas novel, and then I can sip my tea or my lemonade with a smile on my face. So that's gonna be a while, though. I got a long way to go, but when that does happen, and I think as a writer, you want that to a degree, specifically if you're writing for young people, you want to inspire them in some way. And I'm not saying everything you write has to be political or anything like that. No, sometimes by simply showing a young person that they can be the hero of this story, you're unlocking a whole new world for them. You're unlocking something deep inside of them that will come back and affect us all at some point. So I take what I do seriously to that extent. I understand that the young people who read my books now are the leaders and the politicians of tomorrow. And what I say to them, what I show them, can make a huge impact on what they do for this society.
But that's a lot of weight to carry, right? So
yeah.
So are there times where you decide, okay, no, I have to take a break from writing because it's draining, or for any other reason, really?
You know, 2020 is the year of, you know, it's like everything just keeps happening. But what I've decided to do is instead of taking a step away from writing when things get heavy like that, I change the way that I write. So like I use writing as an escapism when I need it, because I know that there are going to be readers who pick up my books and they're going to need that same thing. So for me, it's just a matter of changing the way or changing the way I approach my work. So I don't step away from it too much. What I've done to kind of take that burden off my shoulders of I'm responsible for the next generation is nope. There are so many others of us who are in this too. And, you got Jason Reynolds, you got Nick Stone, you got Elizabeth Acevedo. If these kids get messed up, it's not just on me. So it's a collective thing. But I think we're doing a good job. And just a reminder that I'm not in this alone helps a lot. My peers, they inspire me every single day. Those authors that I mentioned, I'm fans of their work. And that's another thing I think that all aspiring writers, well, I don't like to say aspiring writers. If you write, you're a writer. But I think that every single person who wants to become a published author, the main thing you need to do is read books by people who could potentially be your peers, and absorb what they're doing. And it will inspire you in ways. So that helps me a whole lot with that burden.
So you talked about like reading books about and finding your peers. How did you go about doing that? Like, is there a way those watching today can kind of figure out how to do that?
How to find those books?
Mm-hmm.
Goodreads is a great place. Goodreads is definitely a great place. Usually if you go on there and you say, I loved one book, you can get a recommendation for another. Local independent bookstores and libraries are always a plus. And right now, since we're in, the pandemic and everything, I would also recommend just going online and asking for book recommendations on social media and things like that, searching up the hashtags that are used on Instagram or Twitter to recommend books, and also read diversely. Read books about people unlike yourself. Read books about lives unlike your own, and you will find your world opening up. So definitely, there's so many ways out there to find the good books. I will say, though, right now in young adult literature, there are so many wonderful stories being told from so many different kinds of authors, from so many different backgrounds. So it's something out there. We're working on getting something out there for everyone.
That's great. And I think that's something that everyone is kind of looking forward to, seeing more books by more diverse authors, and just seeing different stories told and getting to learn about people who are unlike yourself, people who might, one day be like a good friend to you. You never know. Mm-hmm. And I feel like sometimes the characters that are most unlike me are the characters I tend to fall in love with the most. So I think that's a wonderful perspective that you have. But I did want to talk a little bit about we talked a little bit about why you write and what you write for, but sometimes I know that as a Black female author myself, sometimes I feel like the onus is on me to write Black narratives. Like I have to write with like my main character being Black, typically a Black female. Have you ever felt like this before?
I'm dedicated to writing Black kids. That's just me and but I never make myself feel as if that's what I absolutely have to do. I don't think we should have to put limits on ourselves as writers, but if we do write outside of our identity in any way, we need to be prepared to do research, do work, and face criticism if we get something wrong, but for me, I do want to write Black kids because they don't get a lot of stories about them. And with my third novel, Concrete Rose, I stepped away from writing girl characters and wrote the main character, who is a 17-year-old boy, stars dad from The Hate U Give when he was 17. So it was definitely a jump, but it was a nice one because I realized, oh, okay, I can write young Black boys as well. So I don't want to put the limits on myself ever. But I chose to only write Black kids, only write them as main characters in my stories because they don't get enough of that as it is.
Hey, Angie. Sorry to interrupt. I hate to interrupt. This is such a great conversation. I'm kind of in the role of timekeeper here, and I just wanted to see if there were any audience questions, really. and those will just pop up on screen if there are any questions that come up. But otherwise, I want to hear you guys keep talking. So.
Oh, I see it. Yeah. What other books would you recommend to high school students? Ooh, I can give you a whole list. Dear Martin by Nick Stone, as well as the upcoming Dear Justice by Nick Stone, which comes out next week. It's the sequel to Dear Martin. I would recommend every single thing that Jason Reynolds writes, down to his grocery list, because I can only imagine what Jason Reynolds' grocery list looks like. I say that as somebody who loves him dearly. But anything that Jason Reynolds writes, and again, another author I mentioned earlier, Elizabeth Acevedo, The Poet X, With the Fire on High, Clap When You Land. She does phenomenal work. Tiffany D. Jackson, if your students would like thrillers and things like that, like every single book that Tiffany writes will leave your students going, oh my God, she really did that, and they're going to be angry with her and send her messages, and that's okay. It's part of growth. She deserves it. So I would also recommend, of course, Tommy Adeyemi and Children of Blood and Bone. Adam Silvera, every single thing he writes. Becky Albertalli, every single thing she writes. So I could go on and on and on. There's so many authors out there right now doing great work in young adult literature, that I think that kids have a wide assortment of choices.
Angie, per the grocery list of Jason Reynolds, we don't have that, but he did write this really great introduction to our book, Brave the Page, that is a teen writing guide. So sorry for this product placement, but it's a super great introduction. So I just want to build on what you said. And Elizabeth Acevedo wrote one of her novels during NaNoWriMo too. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Nick Stone did too, actually.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I think she told me that. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Any more questions, Bryce? Here comes.
All right. What advice do you have for writers who are writing difficult or challenging themes, characters, and how to navigate concerns or pushback from our agent or editor? Oh, listen to those concerns from your agent or editor. Definitely listen, because they have a good idea of how the industry works and the climate of the industry. So definitely take that into consideration. And if you're handling difficult topics, one, take care of yourself during it. Two, do your research, because if this isn't something that has personally happened to you, it's most likely happened to someone. And you need to proceed with caution, proceed with care. When we're writing stories specifically about things that can be triggering to some people, we have to keep in mind that this isn't just a plot point. This is for some people, their lives. And we have to be careful with that. We have to put in the work with that. We have to listen. So listen to the concerns. And that's not to say don't write it, but figure out how best to do it in a way that creates a compelling story, but also a respectful story. That's always the main thing. Whatever you're writing, respect the people who will read this and see themselves, and respect what they have to say about it. Star and Maverick have such incredible voices throughout Thug, especially during tough scenes. Thank you. It's really something I admire and trying to work on. How do you develop your characters' voices? Ooh, child. I got real Southern for a second. I talk to myself a lot. And I know that's going to sound wild, but I do. When I'm writing dialogue, I usually say it out loud as I'm writing it to make sure it sounds okay. The fact of the matter is, if you go out, well, you can't really go out right now, but if this was the normal pre-pandemic world and you went out to like a Starbucks or something and you sat at a table and you listened to 5 different conversations, you're going to hear 5 different people talk different ways. Some people cut off certain words. Some people use shorter sentences than others. Some people, their voices change when they have certain emotions or whatever it may be. You're going to pick up on things. And the best way to write great dialogue is to listen. Listening to movies, even listening to how people speak on movies, that can help you with dialogue, because scripts are really just dialogue, pages and pages of dialogue. But listening to people and taking note of that and making sure that you choose the right words at the right times for each character. Like Maverick and Carlos in The Hate You Give, they're both two Black men, two huge influences in Star's life, but they speak very differently. I look at it as Maverick is Will from The Fresh Prince and Carlos is Carlton, so it's a different way, but that's just them. And it shows their characters and how different their characters are. So pay attention to how people speak, and that will absolutely be one of the best things to help you write dialogue. If you could write something outside of your usual style, what would it be and why? I'm currently working on that, actually. I'm writing my first fantasy novel. It's a middle grade, so for younger readers, ages 10 and up. But honestly, I think anybody hopefully will be able to read it. But I'm excited about it. I get to create an entire world from scratch. I get to create the rules, and that's so fun for me. So I'm really excited about taking that leap. And I think that even if you love my contemporary novels, you will hopefully find a way to connect with this story and this young lady that I'm writing as the main character, this 12-year-old girl. So definitely making the jump. Excited, nervous, anxious, but I got to give it a go, because you know how it is. When you have a story in your mind, in your heart, you got to get it out on the page.
Hey, China, do you have some final questions? I'm just conscious of Angie's time here. Not that I wanted to go short, though. So keep going. But I just wanted to
Yeah. Thank you for those book suggestions earlier. But I just wanted to know, do you have any writing prompts or exercises that you use that you might like to share?
Yeah. One thing that a lot of people ask me about is, you seem to know your characters so well. How is that? And my feeling on it is that you need to know your characters better than anybody, and you need to know stuff that may not even make it onto the page. And there are certain questions you can ask yourself to help you get to know your characters better. So I would suggest that everyone ask themselves, for this book that I'm about to do for NaNoWriMo, what if my main character or characters suddenly got $1 million, what would they do with it? That will tell you a whole lot about that person. That will tell you a whole lot about them, their wants, their desires, their needs, and their personality. So when I think about it with The Hate You Give and Star, if Star got $1 million, she would help her family. She would use it to help Khalil's family, that sort of thing, which reveals a lot about her and who she cares about and what she wants to do and what she's passionate about as a person. If I were to ask Bree that, what would Bree on the come up do with $1 million? She's going to do everything she can to get her family out of poverty, which shows this is her desire. If I ask Maverick that in Concrete Rose, I can tell you what he would do, but that would be spoiling the book. Either way, that's a great question to ask yourself about your character. Maybe your character is rich and doesn't need $1 million. They're just going to spoil it on a bunch of junk, or maybe your character, money doesn't have any meaning for them, so they wouldn't care. That's going to reveal something to you about them. So yeah, ask yourself, maybe do that as a writing prompt. What would my character do with $1 million? And just write it, and you will learn so much more about them.
I love that, Angie. I've never heard that before, but you're absolutely right. I thought about it. It tells you exactly who that person is, their relation to other people in their lives, and their own needs and insecurities, whether it's financial or otherwise.
Yeah, money reveals so much about people. Money is the great revealer. It reveals so much. There's this saying that if you want to know who someone really is, see how they act once they get money.
I love it.
That tells you a whole lot. So go forth, and maybe don't limit it to $1 million. Maybe don't limit it to $1 million. Give them $1 billion. See what they do.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And good luck to everybody with NaNoWriMo. You're going to do it. You're going to do better than I did. I never finished one. during the month.
This is your year, Angie. This is your year.
I may try it this year. I may go for it. So we'll see. But thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank China too. I don't know how apparent our technical difficulties were, but right before Angie came on, I had problems. China had problems. From what I could see, China was amazingly graceful under pressure there while I was somewhere in Webland trying to get on. But thanks you so much. And China, you're going to do NaNoWriMo this year, is that right?
Yeah, and I've only won once in all the years I've been doing it, so we'll see if I win again.
You're going to win. You're going to win. Do you have any? So what is your advice to people going forward? Because you've done it once now.
So the year that I won, I don't know what was wrong with me with that year, but I ended up writing 3 versions of the exact same novel, and I ended up writing like over 100,000 words, and the thing about it was just a random thought idea that I had one time, and I wrote it down, and I was just like, this sounds actually really good. So if you ever have one of those random ideas, I just suggest writing it down. I keep a little notebook with me at all times. Write it down in your phone or something like that. Even if you don't use it this year or next year or the year after that, it might be a wonderful, story to come back to, or maybe just a small plot point that kind of carries your novel through.
That's wonderful advice, because I was thinking about this morning, how I don't think writers necessarily have more ideas for stories, but they pay more attention to them. And so I think like having that notebook with you and paying attention and writing them down, that's perfect, especially right now, a month before NaNoWriMo. So thank you so much also for having, I didn't get to announce this to everybody, but I announced in Slack about a week ago. I said, is anyone a big fan of any of the authors on this show? Do you want to do the interview? And I think China, on like day 3 of your internship, you raised your hand, and I was so impressed, because usually my strategy in those situations is I'm in the back corner of the room, or at least when I was like young. I receded, and I regret not holding on my hand more. So thank you for doing that. That was a great interview, and I wish it could have even gone longer.
Well, thank you for having me. I was really excited to kind of do it, because I love Angie's work. So I was really excited.
Well, great conversation, great questions, and thank you so much. And we're going to move on. We've got 2 more authors, actually. Our next author is Roshani Chokshi, and she is the author of commercial and critically acclaimed books for middle grade and young adult readers that draw on world mythology and folklore. Her work has been nominated for the Locus and Nebula Awards, and she's frequently appeared on Best of the Year lists from Barnes & Noble, Forbes, BuzzFeed, and more. And her New York Times bestselling series includes The Star-Touched Queen duology, The Gilded Wolves, and Aru Shah and The End of Time, which was recently optioned for film by Paramount Pictures. Welcome, Roshani.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. I am curious about your journey as a writer. I read that you started by writing a lot of fan fiction, and then you realized you could tell your own story. And those words were what I wanted to know about. Is tell us about who you are as a writer, and what does it mean to tell your own story?
I like this question better, as opposed to so what kind of fan fiction did you read, which is very good.
You can talk about that too.
I'm literally sometimes a dumpster, but that's fine, because the wonderful thing about fan fiction is it is so emotionally urgent. And the reason why I started writing fan fiction and reading fan fiction was, one, because a truly good story really just depends on how it makes you feel. And for me, when I was growing up, I never really saw myself represented in books, movies, or anything. And so fan fiction was literally a way for me to self-insert my life, my experiences, and my heritage into a fictional world that I already knew and loved.
That's so interesting, because I sometimes fan fiction will be disparaged, and I feel I feel like actually all writing is a type of fan fiction.
It is. It takes so long for people to develop their voice. I mean, you might think that there's musical proteges and all this sort of stuff, but you'll never have a writing prodigy. Not in the sense of this 8-year-old has written the next Pulitzer Prize winner. And the reason is because to write something, to truly write a compelling story, you have to feel all those emotions on some level and be able to displace them, project them, blow them up in a new way. And it also takes a lot of time to figure out what your voice and what your style is. And I think that's what fan fiction does so well. It allows you just to, try on somebody else's coat, walk around in it, see how it fits, and then take it off.
I love that. We're all writing through a persona in some way in the end, and I think that is part of writing your own story. But you're also finding your story through others. And this leads me to my second question. Your dad is Indian and your mom is Filipino. In an interview with Rick Riordan, you said, the way that we bridged those cultural gaps at home was fairy tales and stories. The more things that you read or that you read, the more stories, fables, etc., the more you see that they're all the same across every cultural spectrum. And I can see that in your work, and you've also spoken eloquently about trying to bridge those gaps in your own life. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about building these cultural bridges in your work and life.
Yeah, I mean, for me, a large part of what I write and what inspires me really comes from my family. So I feel like to truly be a good storyteller, you first have to be a compassionate and active listener. And whether that's with the conversations of people around you, or even if it just means digging a little deeper into your family history. So unfortunately, I lost my Filipino grandmother last November. And I wish that that wasn't the thing that inspired me to actually start recording interviews with family members, and to sit down with my grandparents and ask them what their first memories were, and remember that they were all like us. Everybody, the moment when you fall in love for the very first time, what did it feel like for them? What did it feel like for them to come here? And to navigate these two separate cultural traditions. And sometimes you'll find strange little, I don't even know how to describe it, little moments of unevenness in your own family history. So I have a hard to pronounce name. The A is actually silent. Don't worry at all. So it's technically Roshani or Roshni if I didn't read correctly or I got a bad grade on something. Then someone says my name like that. And then my baby brother also has an ethnic name, but he can go by J. Our little sister's name is Monica. Can you imagine? Like, you have all these ethnic names and then your sister's name Monica. How many times she rubbed it in my face when we went to Disney World that she could get a keychain with her name and there was nothing there that even remotely resembled Roshni. And yet, the reason why my little sister has that name is because when she was born, she was so sick that my family thought we would lose her. And so my grandmother said to change her name so that death would not find her. And I just thought, it was extremely creepy and also very disorganized sounding of death. And yet it was something strange that ended up being yet another cultural bridge for me and my work.
Those are amazing stories. And I apologize for mispronouncing.
No, I don't know how to pronounce my own name sometimes. It's fine.
Well, I feel bad.
Don't worry.
And it sounds like it's almost like this is a type of lifestyle that you're doing research, that you're digging into these stories. That's what I find interesting, as opposed to, I don't know if you do particular research for novels as well. Are there two different types of research in your writing in real life? I'm gonna be honest and a little mercenary here. To all the writers out there, it is very important to get a business credit card so that you can write things off. And then when you want to go on vacation, then you can think about, how could I use this in a story? More importantly, how can I make somebody else pay or not have to pay for getting like strange museum tickets? Like, for example, on my honeymoon, my husband and I went to this place. I'm not gonna pronounce it because I will butcher everything in French, but it was essentially the Museum of Lost Carnival Rides. And it had like all these Belle Epoque carousels and all kinds of stuff. And although I initially wrote it off, karma also compelled me to find a way to put it in a story so it made sense. I mean, I think sometimes research for a novel, it'll hit you maybe 3 years later that the thing that you experienced is exactly the sort of imaginational texture that you wanted to add to a story. Also, imaginational is not a word. These are things that you can do when you write fantasy. Language is a myth. Time. Language is evolving. That sounded like a really lovely word to me. So I'm going to take it with me. I want to go to that museum, by the way, and I kind of want to write a novel. that takes place there in some way. So
you absolutely have to. I think they actually used it as the setting for Midnight in Paris.
Okay.
And it was kind of spooky and like just short of sinister. It's the kind of place where you would go and you would think that maybe if you just looked up out of the corner of your eye fast enough, one of those 19th century automatons would be moving or looking back at you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now I got to watch Midnight in Paris again to get the reference because I've forgotten that. Well, cool. Well, National Novel Writing Month is coming up in November. I actually didn't. Usually I get time to chat with people before they come on. I didn't get the time to chat with you. So I'm just curious, have you ever done NaNoWriMo?
Yes. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I did when I was, the first time I did NaNoWriMo, I was, I think, 15 or so. Wow. Yeah. I did it. But I cheated a little bit and cannibalized parts of my fan fiction and like threw it into the book. But it was, I think what is so special about NaNoWriMo is that it teaches you the hardest thing about writing, which is just the act of finishing something, which is so, so hard. I mean, I think as creatives, we have so much issues of perfectionism when it comes to our thoughts and our imagination that we hit a block and sometimes don't know how to get over it, when really the thing that we have to do is to write through it.
That's great. I think NaNoWriMo teaches so many different things, and it is, in the end, an exploration of your creative process and yourself.
Yes.
That's so cool you did it when you were 15. It wasn't around when I was 15, but I would have killed for it. I didn't know that kids could write novels, actually. It just seems something that only adults did.
Right. One of those adult mysteries, like, why do people enjoy wine? It tastes like, I don't know, like rotten soda. I hate this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm curious, because I'm always intrigued by people's writing processes and how you define it. And, we have this spectrum of plotter, planner, pantser. Sorry, I can't say it anymore. So many times I can't say it. Where do you fall in that continuum? And do you have any special, getting ready? Because everyone's getting ready to write their novels now.
Yeah.
So give them some advice.
Actually, the fact that you said planter reminded me of, and I don't remember, I think it was George R.R. Martin who said something like, are you an architect or are you a gardener? Like, do you need a structural layout of what you're doing? Or do you approach your novel writing as if you're seeding something for the story? And for me, I think that the way I approach a story is to think about the emotion that I want a character to end with. Who are they by the end of the story? And then the act of writing the story is about reverse engineering that moment and figuring out what are the things that happen to them? What are the things that they need to react to in order to believably get to this final form?
Interesting. So is this something that you kind of outline or just take some notes and let percolate?
Yeah.
Or do you just go all in and write?
Oh my gosh, no, I would, I tend to start with Pinterest. I'm a really visual writer. I kind of need to understand the atmosphere of the thing I'm writing first. And then what I'll do is I'll list out emotional beats that I feel I need to hit by the end of the story. And I'll put it in Scrivener, which is my absolute favorite writing software. It has functions where you can use index cards or you can shift little pieces of the story around. And that's really helpful for me to just be able to look at the story from a high level before I dive into it.
Cool. Well, I want to remind everybody to be asking questions. And Bryce in the background will be popping them up here. We can take some questions and I'll keep asking questions. Oh, here one comes already.
Great.
How do you come up with an intro to a book? The way you put people into your books is amazing. I'm not sure what they mean by intro necessarily, but how do you create a good hook, I guess, from Haley?
That is, first of all, thank you very much. I'm glad you think so. I really struggle with beginnings. It's the thing that I end up revising the most. But for me, I think a really good hook comes down to something emotional about it, something that's just a little, I guess the way you pull them into it is by doing the unexpected right off the bat, something like that. It's strange because I've been brainstorming actually the first line of what I hope will be a new middle grade novel. And I keep coming back to this idea of a girl who, we always, it's a sad thing in fantasy books, but the parents are never around, which really tends to insult my own parents who are just like, hello, I'm here.
A lot of orphan children in fantasy novels.
Yeah, well, because you can't get away with stuff. I mean, I have extremely loving, overbearing Asian parents. If I was just like, excuse me, I'm a master vigilante, I'm just going to go off, they would catch me and snatch me and put me in the van in a heartbeat. So I was thinking about that, and I came upon this line, like, Corazon Lopez's parents were dead, had been dead for many years, but they still never missed Sunday dinner. Something like, I don't know, that plays unexpected of a sentence. And if you want to steal that sentence, please go right ahead. All storytellers are thieves. It's common knowledge.
You know what? I love this. I wish that we could all take that sentence and write a novel.
Take it!
And then come back here at the end of November, and what we would find is that we have wildly different novels.
I would read all of them happily.
Yeah, that's a great sentence. It has a mystique, it has a hook. So thank you for that.
Of course.
This comes from Isa. What advice do you have for a teenage young writer, especially how can I get my writing out there?
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I think it's wonderful that you're writing. Again, I always feel the hardest thing is finishing stories. I especially feel like at that age when I was writing as a teenager, loved fan fiction, obviously. I tried to read as widely as possible. And I would look into, like, there's a couple workshops that I particularly love. One is the Alpha Writers Workshop, which is taught by a lot of well-known SFF authors. I was very happy to be a guest lecturer this year. And it encourages young writers to have a platform and also just get exposure to critiques. I also really love websites like Reddit that have special subpages for young adult authors and just writers in general, where you can start exchanging work with people, because I really feel like that's the next step after finishing a story. It's allowing your ego to be put out there and like finally zested as somebody rips apart your work and hopefully makes it better.
Yeah, definitely. I will recommend also the NaNoWriMo Forums. People connect that way and form their own writing groups. And we have special functionality on the website now where people can join together and have their own little private group as well. So that's a great question. But thank God you're writing as a teenager. That's a huge step. And we increasingly see more teen writers who are published. While we're waiting for the next question, I know I saw in numerous interviews you mentioned Neil Gaiman as an influence. And I sometimes think, per what we were talking about fan fiction earlier, is that we're always writing alongside or through or kind of with other authors, whether they're real or just authors we read. And so could you talk about some of your influences and maybe Neil Gaiman in particular?
Yeah, I had first come across his collection of short stories when I was a high school student. And I just thought that they were so sly. He would never outright say that the person a character is talking to is a god or a goddess or a fairy, or that the place that they were in was necessarily an other world, but you knew that it wasn't quite our world. I've also really been influenced by the works of Holly Black. Tithe was one of the very first books I read that really, really challenged how I would have thought or imagined a fairy world or other world would feel like. And so that was great. And then the very, very first Indian or Hindu mythology book that I read that I loved was by Lloyd Alexander, and it was called The Iron Ring. And I just remember thinking like, oh my gosh, this character actually looks like me. And if he can do it, I can definitely do it. So that was a really wonderful moment.
Yeah, definitely. Bryce, keep sending up questions. And while you were talking, I would just think, I'll let Sharon's question eclipse mine. Your chapter titles for Arusha are something both me and nephew laugh over a lot and seems to contribute to the voice of the book. Any tips on how you make your story appealing to kids and adults?
Oh, I'm very happy to hear that. Honestly, I feel like I just have to amuse myself. I don't know. I cackle a lot when I'm writing, and I look very strange when I'm writing. I tend to have like a blanket over my head or my special robe, and my cat is there trying to sit on the keyboard. And I also, like, my husband is an eternal child, and I tend to, like, whenever I'm done with the draft of Arusha especially, I will give it to him and I will watch as he progressively slumps in his chair, if he's getting bored or if he starts asking for food, and I'll like bookmark the page where he seemed to have lost interest. and I'll come back and fix it. But ultimately, if you laugh, I would hope that there are other people who share your sense of humor who would laugh too.
That's a great answer. Do you ever use that typewriter behind you?
No, that's just one of the things, many things I've stolen from my parents' house. They're way cooler than me.
Well, Molly asked the question, sorry, this disappears quickly. You posted on IG that you sent the first draft of the third book for Gilded Wolves. How heartbreaking or encouraging are re-edits? Sorry, I read that really fast.
No, I get it. Hi, Molly. Okay. It is a mix of both. Again, I really tend to always be writing or write with a blanket with me. Whenever I get my edit letter for the first time, I like put it over myself and my laptop so that all the despair stays in one place. And then I can push it away. But, you know, I think edits are really difficult, and you have to, I think the art is to not react to them initially, just to sit with it and sit with the information for about a week. And then slowly the things that feel super daunting, you'll realize can actually be changed with an economy of words in the smallest of things. And if they are big changes, if they feel right to you, if they further or deepen the story you're trying to tell, then it's a good edit. And if it doesn't do that, then I tend to ignore it.
Yeah. I always have to put myself in a different mind frame of respond, don't react, don't take it personally.
Yeah.
It's coming from a good place. They just want to help make it better. That kind of stuff. Yeah. While we wait for another question, I'm also curious because you were going to law school when you wrote your first novel, and it seems like a time management challenge to write a novel and go to law school. It also seems like a cognitive challenge to be thinking legalistically and more fantasy-wise. How did you make that happen?
Actually, I would say that, you know, the study of law itself is ultimately the study of storytelling. I mean, if you love words, you'll probably be a great lawyer. And if you can type really fast, and if you remember that the point of a law school exam is to not answer the question, you will also ace law school. But for me, I was really excited to be able to return to a fantasy world when I was done reading a judicial opinion or something. But I think one of the things you really have to be kind to yourself about is that there's no expiration date for the story that you're trying to tell. I think some people who are balancing writing and grad school can feel as if they're always running behind when you're not. You're doing something and you're writing at the pace that is right for the story. So celebrate what you're doing and be kind to yourself.
Yeah, good advice. Since Molly mentioned your posts about writing on Instagram, you also seem to be working on more than one project at a time, which I'm curious about. I really like working on more than one project at a time. I think it speaks to my own attention span in some ways. How do you juggle numerous projects?
I think the way that I do it, and I know it sounds very silly, but I really treat writing as a ritual. You know, like for me, it's always the same thing. I have my favorite blanket or my favorite robe. And particularly when I'm switching between the Gilded Wolves series and Arusha, I have separate writing candles for them. And I find that really helps me sink into the story faster. Maybe it's just because The Silvered Serpents, which came out yesterday, is set in wintry Russia, but I wrote a lot to a sort of like rosemary and eucalyptus candle. And for whatever reason, the Arusha series has preferred to be written by a candle that smells like tomatoes.
I love this. Candles attached to different projects to kind of
it's kind of like scent memory, you know? Like scent it's instantly nostalgic. It instantly takes you somewhere else. And for me, that really helps like signal my brain about what it is that we're doing for that hour.
Yeah, well, Stephen King, you know, when he talks about routine, he says one of the values is unconscious, that you're coming to the same space every day and that's triggering you creatively. So it sounds like you find that in your candles.
I do.
Yeah. Well, I'll ask Bryce if there are any other questions, but on that note, another question from Molly. Well, this will be the last question, then I'll ask you for some words of advice for NaNoWriMo. I love how evocative and beautiful your descriptions always are. How do you create settings and create such strong images as well? From Molly Jane.
Thank you very much, Molly. I'm glad to hear that. And it's strange because I always think that the atmosphere and texture of a novel is the thing that gives it that secret dimension. And for me, I really try, like when I'm in my last stages of revision, to truly put myself in a character's shoes and imagine the different textural details, the way that clothing feels against their skin, the way that the ground can feel hot or cold or rocky. And there are authors who I think do very luscious description, and not in a descriptive way, but in the way that the setting makes you feel. And for that kind of writing, I highly recommend reading the works of Catherine Valenti, if you haven't already. Another favorite author of mine is Angela Carter. And I feel that what they do is they make the setting personal. And when you can push that, make it nostalgic in a way for a character, or have emotional consequence, that's when the setting and descriptions can feel more lifelike.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, we're just ask if you one more question if you have time.
Yes.
Since you're a NaNoWriMo, I'm going to call you a NaNoWriMo pro.
Yes.
A seasoned NaNoWriMo writer. What words of advice would you give to people, whether they're first timers or if they've done it before? What do you think they should know going in?
I would say, first of all, to remember that you can always change something, but you cannot fix what isn't there. And that's really the beauty of NaNoWriMo, to really help you get to the end of something. And especially for the fantasy writers out there who are working on secondary worlds, if you feel stuck, the number one thing that I ask myself when I'm trying to build a secondary world is, what do these people do with their dead? It is the one question that ends up informing almost everything I need to know about them, from the way they organize their society to the deities that they might have, and especially to their own superstitions. I come from, I don't know, first generation American. We are very superstitious. Maybe it's just immigrant families, but I tend to find that superstition and urban folklore in a secondary world can make it feel more lifelike.
Wow. I love that. Angie Thomas left us with the advice to give your characters $1 million and see how
I love that. Yeah.
And yours has a certain similarity, like how we treat the dead. That's wonderful to create another world. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. I love your questions.
Yeah, well, we loved your answers. So I hope you do NaNoWriMo again someday.
I will.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Roshani.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And next up, everybody, we have the finale here with Jack Thorne, who is the screenwriter of Enola Gay. He's a super animated guy, super writer. He writes up to 14 hours a day, or he used to before he had a son. And just to give you a little background, he won a Tony Award for his first Broadway outing, writing the script for Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. And his movie credits include, he's written a bunch of movies and a bunch of scripts, but he's written The Aeronauts with Eddie Redmayne, The Secret Garden with Colin Firth, and His Dark Materials, the BBC HBO series that he adapted from Philip Pullman's fantasy novels. So I think we're going to cue up Jack Thorne. And after Jack Thorne, I think you should all go watch Enola Holmes, sign up for NaNoWriMo, and read some books on Goodreads, review some books on Goodreads. Hey, Jack, thanks so much for joining us. I know it's dinner time in London, but it's wonderful to talk with you today on Enola's premiere today.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be talking to you. Yeah,
well, I'm intrigued because I'm a writer, but I've never written a screenplay. And every time I watch the Academy Awards or something, there's the award for Best Adapted Screenplay. And I think a lot of people think, oh, that's the easy screenplay to write because that's based on a book or an existing story, and you just kind of cut and paste a lot of it, right? So I was curious, is it really easier than an original screenplay, or what are the challenges what were the challenges to adapting Enola?
It's very different, and it's very different from each book. Each book you're doing it creates a different set of problems. There is a joy to having a story. There is a real joy to be able to disappear inside another author's head, to not have the responsibility of being the sole brain, if you like, in that scripting process. Later on down the line, there are many brains get involved, but in that first instance, that first blank page, to be sharing the page with someone that's already trod this story before is very, very nice. But technically, it can be very, very tricky, and you are required. There's a lot of obviously the internal monologue is a central part of the writing process for novelists, and there is a lot of trying to work out how what works on the page can work on the screen, and that can be really, really hard.
I bet. In some ways, I think it might be more challenging because you've got to make all sorts of decisions about what to keep from the book, what works, what will work on the screen versus what might not work, things like that.
Yes. I've got to say I love it though. So you know, it is one of my favorite things to do.
Oh, cool. Well, hey, I read, speaking of that, I read that when you were writing His Dark Materials, that the first draft underwent 46 drafts. And we're talking to a lot of beginning writers out there today. And so I think it's really important for them to know that when you write the first draft of something, there's still a lot to come. But 46 drafts is also a lot. So I was just wanting to get your perspective on revision and maybe your sense of perfectionism and why it requires 46 drafts.
So I would say for me, it takes 3 or 4 drafts until I'm happy. The difficulty on His Dark Materials was that no one could decide what they were happy with. So we were constantly, and we were trying to find an American partner. And we didn't have an American partner, so we had the BBC involved, but we didn't have an American broadcaster, and we needed that chunk of money. So there was a lot of sort of trying to find our way, experimenting with new things, and it was all about what is an incredibly dense and very, very complicated book. How to package that for television. And you know, Philip Pullman is a headache. He's a headache to read, and he's a headache to adapt. But what a glorious, glorious headache he is!
I love that, a glorious, glorious headache. Well, speaking of maybe less glorious headaches, I also read that you sometimes write as many as 14 hours a day, which I have to say to people who maybe don't write out there, that is like the upper limit of what I hear from most writers. When I first became a writer, I read Hemingway's A Movable Feast, and he had this model of writing for 2, 3, maybe 4 hours, quitting before he, kind of spent all of his energy. And then he would have a wonderful afternoon full of inspiration to get ready for the next day. And I know that you don't go for walks for inspiration. You stay at the computer and you thrash your way through to find the story. So why does staying at the computer, because that's very punishing. Why do you do that instead of, take a walk or I don't know, something else?
Yeah, I mean, he went bullfighting and stuff, didn't he?
Yeah.
I mean,
nice leisurely.
I don't know that I necessarily would want to do that. And he was a very tortured man. The truth is twofold. One is it's the graft helps me. So that process of throwing things away helps me a lot. That I like to have the ability to walk down lots of dark alleyways and go, nope, this is wrong. I need to reverse. And the other thing is I really love it. And I'm slightly psychologically dependent on it. So I will quite happily just disappear into my own head for a long time. I don't really do 14 hours a day anymore. And the reason why I don't is because I've got a kid. And sadly, being a parent carries some time responsibilities with it. And I want to be part of his life. But I still do work insane hours and I love it. Yeah.
That's actually great to hear, because I think sometimes there's too much made of the anguish that a writer needs to go through. And when I imagined you sitting there for 14 hours, I imagined it being somewhat anguished, but it sounds like you're actually kind of being playful and having fun.
No, it's anguish. It's horrible. And,
Okay.
I remember my father-in-law came and stayed once and he kept on asking me at the end of every day. I was going to the library at the time to work and then coming back, and he kept on saying, good day, Jack, good day. And after like 4 or 5 days, I was like, David, I have like one good day in 14, maybe. Most days are just like hammering my head against the table. So no, it wasn't a good day, and it will unlikely be a good day tomorrow. So maybe we shouldn't ask that question anymore.
Okay, kind of Sisyphean, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of good days, what was the best the thing you enjoyed most about turning Enola Holmes, the series, into a script?
One, beautiful books by Nancy, who I believe you're talking to tonight too, which is and she's amazing. And I had my pick, that I could go, that when Legendary sent me this job, that they said use any of the books that are useful to you, and that was glorious, being able to take little snippets from all over the place. Two, I love Enola, and I love writing her, and I knew I was writing from Millie from the beginning, that it was Millie's project, and so I always had her in my head, and always had a version of her in my head, and I was also talking to her through the process, so I was getting to know her, and that was really special too. So I'd say both those things.
That's so cool. I was thinking, because I know Nancy did at least a fair amount of research into Victorian England in order to write the books. Sounds like part of your research was getting to know Millie's voice and Nancy's novels. Yeah. Did you also do research in terms of the time period?
Yes, though the reason why the 1884 Reform Act is in there is because I studied it. That I studied a lot of British 19th century history, was a period that always fascinated me. So I did do some research, but I also had some prior knowledge, which I was trying to inject into the script.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, speaking of Millie and Millie's voice and getting to know that, and kind of characterizing Enola through that, I'm curious, because dialogue seems to me like that's the main tool of a screenwriter for everything in some ways, but especially for characterization. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you use dialogue as a tool for characterization, or how you used it in this movie.
One of the central things I did was have her break the fourth wall, and I did that partly because it was useful. The film had to be about her being alone. That was the whole subject, and the reason why Sherlock has Watson, and the reason why Lyra has Pan is that you need someone to riff off. Otherwise, you are a character just walking down the streets on your own. And so there was a part sort of like, this will be useful. I can make the camera her friend, so that her loneliness is visually depicted in the fact that we are the people that she has to talk to. She doesn't have anyone else to talk to. And the second reason is that I felt like this is a story that had that slight Shakespearean feel to it, and that ability to kind of share thoughts with the audience felt like something that could be very fun and give it a different tonal feel. Fleabag Series 1 had just come out, and I was a massive fan of it, and I did, when Legendary first contacted me about it, I said, you need to watch Fleabag, and this was before Harry was involved. And that also was going through my head.
Oh, very cool. I love Fleabag, and I love this as a technique. I love it as a technique to show her aloneness in that inner dialogue as well. So that's really inventive. Well, I'm curious, do you have a favorite moment of dialogue or a little scene you could share with us in conclusion? Right after you do this, I'm going to invite everyone to go and watch the movie. So this would be a great send-off.
So there is a scene that came very, very late in the film. I won't quote it because that feels weird, but there's a scene that comes very, very late in the film between, oh no, I'm not going to say that. I was about to say something that I realized then is a massive spoiler for the film.
Uh-oh.
So
Sorry.
I'm not going to say that. So I am going to say instead, oh no. Well, yes, okay. I'm going to say instead that Lestrade is one of my favorite characters in this. He's played by a wonderful actor and a friend of mine called Adil Akhtar. And when she meets Lestrade, it's in this country house, and they both get evicted from it together. And then they have a competition as to who knows Sherlock best. And it's very playful in terms of that thing of just kind of playing within the sort of tropes of Sherlockian, intrigue, but also a bit silly. And I think it's very resonant within our film. It's very representative of our film. So yes, I'd say that's the moment between Lestrade and Enola. But really, my favorite scene is very close to the end, and when you watch the film, it'll be very clear why it's my favorite scene. But I can't say it now.
Well, I love your description of that one scene of being full of Sherlockian intrigue and silliness, because that really comes through in the trailers that I've watched. I'm looking forward to those characteristics. So thank you so much, Jack, for joining us. It's been a delight, and I love the screenplay from what I've seen of it on the trailers, and I can't wait to see the whole film basically now.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I really, really hope you like it.
I will. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us from London, and I'll let you get back to your son and your dinner and the premiere of Enola today.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I'm going to urge you to watch Enola Holmes now to get excited about writing and to get excited about storytelling. Go to Goodreads and track your books and discuss your books with your friends and read your favorite novels, get ready for NaNoWriMo, and then put on your proverbial Viking helmet and dive into your novel with gusto. So just track these 3 buttons over in the left-hand corner, but sign up for NaNoWriMo, it's free. Tell your story. Your story is important. Your story matters. And one more thing I was supposed to tell is that all these clips are going to be on the Goodreads YouTube channel within 24 hours. So thank you so much. Tell your story. Bye-bye.